Hello and welcome to the mat cutting tutorial. To start things off, we're going to go over the different materials that are going to be required to complete the task of cutting your mats down. So I have a yardstick here. You can use a ruler, but a regular 12-inch ruler is not preferable as you're going to have to be moving it around a lot. So larger format, 36-inch ruler is going to be ideal. Okay. All right. You want to have a sharp 2B pencil, so make sure you have your sharpener on hand at all times. You want to make sure that you keep your pencil nice and sharp. Because this is a 2B pencil, it's going to be on the softer side, and it's going to wear down a little bit easier. You're not going to be doing a lot of marking, so you're probably only going to have to sharpen it once, but do make sure that you have a sharp pencil for this. Okay. Next thing is the self-healing mat. This is a large format one. You can go smaller than this if you want, but if you go with a larger format, it's going to be a little bit easier to cut your mats down from the larger format that you'll start with. So these come in a variety of sizes. This is actually 22 by 28 inch railroad board that you can get on Amazon for like $17 or $18. This is going to be ideal. You can see it's a heavier format, but there's still a little bit of flex to it. So this is 4-ply. It's pretty heavy duty, and this is perfectly reasonable in price for a pack of 25. I mean, you know, 18 bucks, that's less than $1 a sheet. If you get anything like foam core or heavier poster board, you know, this is a foam core project, for example, it's going to run you a few bucks per sheet that you're going to cut down. So it's just going to be way too expensive. And if you go with the railroad board that you can get on Amazon for about 18 bucks, that's going to last you the entire semester, and you're going to be getting the best value. And this stuff is a lot easier to cut than, say, a foam core or a heavier duty poster board like this. So again, I highly recommend the 22 by 28 inch railroad board from Amazon for about $18. Okay. Self-healing mat is very important because you're going to be using an X-Acto blade. You want to make sure you use an X-Acto blade and not a scissors to cut your projects down, because it's easier to control and it's not going to result in any flexes or bends in the paper from using something like a crude instrument like a scissors or even a cutting board. This is going to give you a little bit more precision. So make sure you have a nice sharp X-Acto blade, okay? And replacement blades are relatively cheap at the store. You know, you do want to check the sharpness of your blades frequently, excuse me. And self-healing. So the cutting mat, you know, if I mark into it, it's not really going to affect the surface at all. So this is a great thing to have, especially if you're working in sensitive areas where you have nice wood or nicely finished furniture or anything like that. This is going to ensure that you don't do any damage to that furniture. Okay. Another thing as well, we have the how to mount your design to a mounted surface. So this is pretty much walking you through the entire process. The first part being, right here, cutting down from the 22 by 28 inch surface, or alternatively a 25 by 30 inch surface. There's a variety of different sizes, but this will walk you through everything from cutting your mats down to how to measure your project on your mat to make sure you have even measurements, to actually spraying the back of your project with adhesive and mounting precisely to your matted surface. Okay, so we're aiming to get two 12.5 by 15 inch surfaces, so that's about this size. So if we look at one of these sample projects here, this one, you can see if we're working with an 8.5 by 11 inch project, you know, we have a pretty nice amount of room on each side, about 2 inches or so. Okay, so this is going to be pretty much the standard for all the projects that we're going to be doing in this course, save for 2 projects towards the end of the semester. So if you get the railroad board, 22 by 28, it's going to yield 2 of these, two 12.5 by 15 inch surfaces. Okay, so we're going to want to measure. I'm going to grab my ruler here, and I'm going to start with my railroad board landscape oriented. So that's this orientation here, which is more horizontal. If we're talking about portrait orientation, that's going to be more vertical. But we'll start horizontally for now and get our initial measurements, mark our lines, and cut the surface down. I'm going to cut down one 12.5 by 15 inch surface because it'd be kind of tedious to show you both, but you'll have the markings to essentially cut down to 2 from one of these larger sheets. Okay. All right. So I'm dealing with 28 inches across horizontally, which means I can get away with 2 measurements of 12.5 across on the top and the bottom with an extra, what is that, 3 inches on the end, okay? So, I'm going to go ahead and start on this side, and I'm going to measure at the 12.5 mark. And I'm going to do that on the bottom of my mat and on the very top, because that way I have the exact same measurement on both sides, okay? We're going to go up to the top and do the same thing. We're going to measure 12.5. Okay, so now I have 2 marks that I can work with that are going to allow me to precisely draw a straight line from one side of the paper to the other at the 12.5 inch mark. Okay, and this is essential to completing the second step, which is to draw the next 12.5 inch mark that's going to result in that extra 3 inches off the side that I just mentioned. Okay, so I'm just going to stand up here so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to find that mark on the top and the bottom. And now that I've found those 2 marks, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line across the mat. Okay, and now that I have that line, I can use that to draw the next 12.5 inch line. Okay, so we're starting at the top this time, 12.5. I'm going to go ahead and measure that. Just make a little tick mark there. We're going to go to the bottom, same thing. We're going to be using that initial 12.5 inch line to measure the next one, 12.5. Okay, now I'm going to draw a line from the top tick mark to the bottom. Okay. All right. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, we're going to rotate the paper portrait style, and we're going to measure 15 inches, okay? So you're going to start on one side of the paper. You're going to take your ruler. You're going to line it up with the edge. You're going to mark on the bottom, a little tick mark at the 15-inch part. And then we're going to do the same thing on the top. We're going to measure at the 15-inch mark. Now, we are going to measure. Actually, we don't need to measure. We're just going to draw a line. Just have to find those marks that I made just a second ago. Having a hard time seeing that one. I'm going to measure this side again. Just to find the mark. So bear with me for one moment. Oh, there it is. Yep, I see it now. Just wasn't clear enough before. Okay, so we're going to line those 2 tick marks up. I know this isn't the easiest thing to see right now, but as long as you're following along, you should be good. Alright, there we go. Alright, so now I actually have 2 12.5 by 15 inch surfaces measured on my 22 by 28 inch mat. So this is a great place to be in at this point, because now you're all ready to start cutting this thing down to yield 2 of those surfaces that I mentioned. Okay, so we have our X-Acto blade. I like to work with an even pressure, about 45 degrees above the matted surface that I'm cutting, and it's really essential that you use a fair amount of pressure when you're cutting, because you don't want to have to go over the line that you previously cut, because a lot of times that can result in jagged lines or uneven cuts. It's not ideal. Okay. Another thing you want to keep in mind, you might think, oh, well, if I, use my ruler as a guide, I can follow the lines more precisely. I've always found that that doesn't work very efficiently, or effectively, rather. What happens is a lot of times you'll be following the ruler, and your hand will kind of meander to one side or the other, and it's going to result in uneven cuts. So better to do it by hand. You can go very slow, but doing it by hand is what I would, what I believe to be the most effective. Okay, you can start with either line that you've drawn. Doesn't really matter. All right. So I have my pointer finger on the blade. It's going to be at a slight 45-degree angle, and we're just going to be nice and steady, and we're going to cut along those guidelines that we just drew. Okay. Again, you want to make sure that you apply a nice, even pressure. Better to go slow and get the lines right and be precise than to rush it and result in a wasted surface or jagged lines. Okay? So nice and even. You just want to be mindful of where your mat is while you're cutting. If you need to adjust, which you will inevitably if you have a limited size mat. Just want to make sure that you're not extending your knife blade outside of the cutting mat area, because that's not going to be good. Okay. Nice even pressure, and I was actually able to successfully cut the paper in half in one stroke, so I don't have to deal with the second line. Sometimes you have to, if it just doesn't cut completely through, or if you have to trim it down a little bit later, that's okay. But better to try and apply a nice even pressure right out the gate so that you don't run into that problem. All right. Now I'm just going to follow the guidelines and cut one of these down to 12.5 by 15. Like I said, I'm not going to waste our time with cutting the second one, because you already have the lines there. You can see, or you can figure that out on your own after the video is over. Okay. Because you'll get a sense of the process. Okay, so I'm going to use the one that just has a single line. It doesn't have that 3-inch section on it. That way we only have to deal with one cut here. Okay. So same thing. You just want to cut by following the guideline that you drew. And again, better to go slow and get it precise than to rush it and result in a wasted surface or jagged cuts. Okay, so yeah, again, one of those 22 by 28 inch railroad boards will result in two 12.5 by 15 inch mats. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to talk about mounting your project to your matted surface. So for our purposes, we're just going to say this is my project. This is the front side, and this is the back side. Okay. So the first couple times that you mount your projects to your matted surface, you're going to want to measure, and it's going to be 2 inches on the top and the bottom, and the left and the right. And the reason why you measure is because a lot of times, projects can be placed unevenly from side to side, or at an angle, or too high or too low, and measuring will just make sure that you get it precisely where it needs to be on the mat board. I'm going to just eyeball it because I've done this a few times. Once you've gotten the hang of it, you can kind of see if it's askew in any direction, but for our purposes right now, I'm just going to eyeball it. Okay, so I'm placing my project. Let me see if I can show you a little bit more clearly. Placing it evenly onto my matted surface. Okay, so let's say it's exactly where it needs to be right now. Next, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to make little marks on the mat in the corners of my project. Okay, and if you wanted to use just a blank sheet of cardstock, to mark the placement, that'll avoid you touching the surface too much. So that's ideal. The oils in our hands oftentimes can smudge and destroy projects. So you just want to be careful that you maintain a limited amount of touching to the project. Okay. And most all of our projects are going to be done with a cardstock. So just set this thing aside for a second. Cardstock is going to be a little bit of a heavier weight than our regular printer paper. And this is going to be ideal for most projects because this stuff's heavy enough that it doesn't soak through, and you can spray adhesive on the backside of your project. It's not going to soak through like a regular sheet of computer paper. So make sure that you get a pack of cardstock. You can get, I think, like a pack of 50 at Walmart for $6 or $7. I would avoid Staples or Office Depot because you're going to be dealing with higher prices there. I think usually between $15 and $20 for a stack of cardstock. So Walmart's going to be the best way to economize if you're looking for cardstock. Okay, so now that I have my marks, again, there's marks in the each of the corners where I had placed my project previously. And the reason why we mark these is because we want to make sure that we know exactly where the project needs to be placed before we spray the project on the back side with spray adhesive to mount. Because what oftentimes can happen is we'll spray our project and we don't have a marked surface, and we go to place our project, right? And say it's placed unevenly. Now what happens? I mean, we've basically wasted a project and a surface. So if we take this up, adhesive is going to be in undesirable places, and when we remount, it's going to be visible in the side sections or in the matted section of the project. Which leads me to the next thing, which is you don't want to spray your mat board directly. If you spray your mat board directly, you're going to get spray adhesive in unintended areas. So again, you spray the back of your project. You don't spray the matted surface because it's going to put adhesive in unintended areas and it's not going to look good. Okay, so this is the front side of my project. I have my image area and the back side with my non-image area. So I'm going to clean environment, place my project upside down, and you want to make sure for this step that you're in a ventilated area. I'm not going to actually be using spray adhesive in here because I'm in my dining room, but ideally, if you can do this outside, if there isn't a breeze or any wind blowing, you want to use your spray adhesive to spray the back of your project and then place on your mat. Do not do this indoors if there's no ventilation. Classroom T407, we have that hood ventilator in there. If you do spray your projects in there, which is more of a last resort, I would wait at least 5 minutes with the hood on before you turn it off. Okay, and that's going to avoid fumes entering into the space, and they're toxic fumes. You don't want to deal with them. The 3M brand adhesive is best and pretty cheap. I think you can get a bottle of that for about $5 or $6. But I would start with a clean surface, have my project face down. This is the non-image backside of my project. And I'm going to take my spray adhesive, and you can be about 12 inches away from your project, and spray in an even application. And you can go the other way as well. But make sure that you're about a foot away because that stuff is really easy to oversaturate your work surface. So if you use too much of it, it could potentially soak through. You just want to have a nice, light, even coat. Okay? That brings us back to our 12.5 by 15 inch mat board here. So now my project's sprayed. I want to avoid touching this surface because I don't want to get adhesive on my hand that's going to then lead to my mat board and result in something that looks not too professional. So now that I have my project, I just want to be mindful that I don't touch the adhesive area. Excuse me. And I'm going to place it precisely within the guidelines that I drew a few moments ago. Okay, now that I've done that, you want to take a blank sheet of cardstock, and I would even say if you're in a pinch, you could use a regular sheet of computer paper. Place it directly on top of your project and apply a nice even pressure. Make sure you get the corners nice and pressed down as well. So you're kind of pushing out the air bubbles if you need to. And the reason why we use a blank sheet of cardstock or computer paper for this is you're avoiding any of the oils in your skin that are going to soak in with your project, and it's not going to result in anything good. So make sure that you're using a blank sheet, pressing down on that to avoid the oils saturating the ink or whatever media you're using for your project. Okay, so now your project should be nice and mounted. Next thing you want to do, if you see any obvious marks in the corners from where you had initially marked for placement, just take your gum eraser and erase those, and your project should be ready for submission. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at peide@carrollcc.edu. Otherwise, good luck.